In this lesson, we'll talk a little bit about tiling smaller textures to cover larger surfaces. So this is 06 Begin. You can see we have some stones for the fireplace, and we also have a couch. So let's take a look at these stones. We want, let's say, a sort of obviously stone type of a texture across these stones, but let's say that we don't necessarily have one image that we can use to do that. So one large image that will encompass all of these. If we take a look at the UVs for these, they're kind of broken down into 3 different sets, and you can do these different ways. You know, if you wanted to do each stone as its own piece and then have those duplicated, then you can maybe have a few textures for each stone. In our case, we've got all of these stones sort of tiled across here, and you can see there are a few different sections. So if I select across here, we've got a section, and then if I come down here and select these, I've got a section as well. I can go ahead and move those up into the 0 to 1 space. It'll tile if you leave it down there, but I'll go ahead and move it up there. And the other one as well, make sure that section is in there also. So they're all contained within there, but they're all sort of moved around. And so because of that, one image isn't really going to work. So we need to have an image that we can tile across the surface. So we can make a small section of stone. We can make it cover the entire surface without being able to see any sort of seams. We want to maybe do the same thing for the couch. So we probably don't have an image just of a single couch that we can sort of unwrap and create our texture from. You may have that. You may be able to take some pictures of yours and then unwrap those. But let's say that we just have a section of fabric. How can we get those to tile across the surface? Well, let's take a look here in Photoshop. This is stone 1. It's going to be in your project files. There'll be a lot of images in your project files within the source images directory of the My Project. And there's a raw folder inside there. So this is, let's say this is the stone that we want to create. But the idea is that we want to have this section be able to repeat. And so the first thing I'll do is just kind of square this off a little bit. So this is a kind of a large image. So I'm going to take the height to 2048. And then I'll take go to the canvas size and then resize that as well and clip it down so it's a nice square shape. Now, what we need to happen is we need the edge pixels on the top and bottom to be the same. So it'll tile that way and then also from side to side. One of the ways that we can do this is to go to Other under Filter and just do an offset. Now this image is 2048. So if we take it 1024, that's going to take it halfway across this way and halfway across that way. Now this particular image is actually pretty close, but you can kind of see the line right there. So this was the edge before of our texture. So now we can come in here and let's just use our stamp. And anywhere we see an edge, we can click and sort of paint across that to hide that edge. I'm going to use kind of full opacity here so there's not really any blurring. Now sometimes this one's going to be pretty easy to do that with. Some of them are going to be a little bit harder, especially if the lighting isn't flat, because once you do this you'll become very apparent. Even if it looks flat, it'll become really apparent. You'll have some darkness coming in from the edges, and then that edge is going to be harder to hide. A lot of times you can tile this and then put a copy of the original back in the center to kind of help with that. Okay, but the idea with this now is that it is fairly seamless. Once you hide that edge, you can take this and set whatever value we want in here, and anywhere we put it, it's going to look, you're not going to be able to see much of a seam. You can see it's kind of a light area right in there, but that's how we want to happen. The same thing with this cloth. Now we would do the same thing here with the tiling for the cloth. So if we were to come in and do an offset on this, you can see where it still is fairly seamless. Now, if you do repeats often enough, if there's any distinguishing pixels in this, a stain, anything, those are going to show up in every tile. So you want it to be kind of as flat as possible. And so to tile that. So let's go back into Maya now. Let's look at how we can set this up. So we'll go into our Hypershade and let's create delete any of the unused. I'm going to create a new material so we can start from scratch. We'll create a blend, and let's just drop this blend onto all of these stones. So I'll assign that. I'm going to make sure that the 2D texture is set to normal projection. So we'll go into color. Let's add a file. And for the file, we're going to use that stone tiled. So there'll be, I'll show you where it is. It's going to be in your source images, and it's going to be this stone tiled JPEG. So it's the one we've already tiled it. So we'll add that to the color. Let's turn on our hardware texturing. And you can see the scale of this stone. It's tiling, but it's too big. It's way too big. So to decrease the size of the stone, we want to increase the number of tiles. So right now if we go in here to our placement node, and this goes along with our stone tiled image, go into the placement, you can see it's repeating it one time. So it's taking that image one time in that 0 to 1 space. So all we have to do to decrease the size is just increase our repeat in the U. And now it's going 5 times across that 0 to 1 space. And so you can just take a look and see, okay, that's the right scale. That's the scale that I want. And because it's tileable, we don't see the seams. Otherwise, if we were repeating this 5 times, we would see all these little lines across here for the repeats. But because it's tileable, we don't see that. We can change the scale appropriately. Okay, we can do the same thing here on the couch. If we take a look at this couch, let me set this over to viewport 2.0 so it looks a little bit better. You can see the couch and the cushions are the same way. If we take a look at the couch material, this couch main Phong, and we go into the color and into the placement, you can see that this is repeating 15 times. And I just repeated that visually, just went by how it looks visually in the viewport to get the right scale. Now, depending on how your UVs are laid out, you may need to repeat it a different number of times. The cushions have their own material. And so if we go into the cushion color, you can see it's only repeated 8 times to get a similar scale. And so not only does it depend on the repeats in the U and the V, but it also depends on the size of your UVs. If your UVs take up the whole space, then you're going to set a different tiling versus if they take up just a portion of it. So I've created 2 materials for those. So using the same image with different tiling amounts, I can get something visually that looks very similar for the couch. And see, you can kind of see with this, little repeats here and there. So again, you have to be really careful when repeating your textures, just so that anything that's distinctive is going to really stand out. Okay, so that's taking a look at working with tiling textures and applying those in Maya to add to your interiors on things like fabrics and stone, things like that. The next thing we'll talk about is hiding seams. So anytime you have a UV layout, you're going to have a seam somewhere. Let's take a look at how we can start to hide and camouflage those.